I don't know, sir, said Harry. Snape's lip curled into a sneer. Tut tut, famous clearly isn't everything. He ignored Hermione's hand. Let's try again, Potter. Where would you look if I told you to find me a Bezoar? Hermione stretched her hand as high into the air as it would go without her leaving her seat. But Harry didn't have the faintest idea what a Bezoar was. He tried not to look at Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were shaking with laughter. I don't know, sir. You wouldn't open a book before coming up, Potter. Harry forced himself to keep looking straight into those cold eyes. He had looked through his books at Dudley's, but this Snape expected him to remember everything in 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. Snape was still ignoring Hermione's quivering hand. What is the difference, Potter, between Monkshot and Wolfbane? At this, Hermione stood up, her hand stretching toward the dungeon ceiling. I don't know, said Harry quietly. I think Hermione does. Though, why don't you try her? A few people laughed. Harry caught Seamus' eyes, and Seamus winked. Snape, however, was not pleased. Sit down, he snapped at Hermione. For your information, Potter, Asphodel and Wormwood make a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the Draught of Living Death. A Bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat, and it will save you from most poisons. As for Monkshot and Wolfbane, they are same plants which also goes by the name of Unshine. Well, why aren't you all copying that down? There was a sudden rummage for quills and parchment. Over the nose, Snape said, and a points will be taken from Gryffindor House for your cheek, Potter. Things didn't improve for Gryffindor as the potion lesson continued. Snape put them all into pairs and set them to mixing up simple potion to cure boils. He swept around in his long black cloak, watching them weigh dried nettles and crushing snake fangs, crystalline almost everyone except Malfoy, who he seemed to like. He was just telling everyone to look at the perfect way Malfoy had stewed his horn slugs when clouds to exceed, green smoke and a loud hissing filled the dungeon. Neville had somehow managed to melt Seamus' cauldron into a twist bob, and their potion was steamed across the stone floor, burning hole in people's shoes. Within seconds, the whole class was standing on their stools, while Neville, who had been drenched into potion when the cauldron collapsed, moaning in pain, angrily red balls sprang up over his arms and legs. Idiot boy, sneered Snape, clearing the spilled potion anyway with one hand of his wand. I suppose you added the porcupines before taking the cauldron of the fire. Neville wimped as spoils started to pop all over his nose. Take him up the hospital wing, Snape spat at Seamus. Then he rounded on Harry and Ron, who had been working next to Neville. You, Potter, why didn't you tell him not to add the quills? Thought it made you look good if he got it wrong, did you? That's another point you've lost for Gryffindor. This was so unfair that Harry opened his mouth to argue, but Ron kicked him behind the cauldron. "Don't push it," he muttered. "Ivor Snape can turn very nasty." As they climbed the steps out of the dungeon, an hour later, Harry's mind was racing and his spirits were low. He'd lost 2 points for Gryffindor with his very first week. Why did Snape hate him so much? "Cheer up," said Ron. "Snape always taking points of Fred and George. Can I come and meet Hagrid with you?" At 5 to 3, they left the castle and made their way across the grounds. Hagrid lived in a small wooden house on the edge of the forbidden forest. A crossbow and a pair of galoshes were outside the front door. When Harry knocked, they heard a frantic scrambling from inside and several booming birds. Then Hagrid's voice rang out, saying, "Back, Fang, back!" Hagrid's big hairy face appeared in the crack as he pulled the door open. "Hang on," he said. "Back, Fang!" He let them in, struggling to keep a hold on the collar of an enormous black bear hound. There was only one room inside. Hams and peas were hanging from the ceiling. A copper kettle was boiling on the open fire, and in the corner stood a massive bed with a patchwork quilt over it. "Make yourselves at home," said Hagrid, letting go of Fang, who bounded straight at Ron and stared, licking his ears. Like Hagrid, Fang was clearly not as fierce as he looked. "This is Ron," Harry told Hagrid, who was pouring boiling water into a large teapot and putting rocks cakes onto a plate. "Another Weasley, said Hagrid, glancing at Ron's freckles. "I spent half me life chasing you twin brothers always from the forest." The rock cakes were a shapeless lump with raisins that almost broke their teeth. But Harry and Ron pretended to be enjoying them, as they told Hagrid all about their first lesson. Fang rested his head on Harry's knee and dawdled all over his robes. Harry and Ron was delighted to hear Hagrid call Filch "that old git," and a third that cat Mrs. Norris. "I like her introduced to Fang sometimes. Do you know, every time I go to the school, she follows me everywhere. I can't get rid of her. Filch puts her up to it." Harry told Hagrid about Snape's lesson. Hagrid, like Ron, told Harry not to worry about it, that Snape liked hardly any of the students. "But he seemed to really hate me." "Rubbish," said Hagrid. "Why should he?" Harry couldn't help thinking that Hagrid didn't quite match his eyes when he said that. "How's your brother Charlie?" Hagrid asked Ron. "I like him a lot, great with animals." Harry wondered if Hagrid had changed the object on purpose. Which Ron and Hagrid all about Charlie's work with dragons. Harry picked up a piece of paper that was lying on the table under a tea cozy. It was cutting from the Daily Prophet. Gringotts Break-in Lost. Invasions continued into the break-in at Gringotts in 31 July, widely believed to be worked on dark wizard or witches unknown. Gringotts Goblin today insists that nothing had been taken. Their wallets that was searched had in fact emptied the same day, but we're not telling you that what was it in there, so keep your nose out if you know that's good for you, said a Gringotts goblin this afternoon. Harry remembered Ron telling him on the train that someone had tried to rob Gringotts, but Harry hadn't mentioned the date. Hagrid, said Harry, the Gringotts break-in happened on my birthday. If it might be happening while we were there. There was no doubt about it. Hagrid definitely didn't meet Harry's eyes this time. He grunted and offered him another rock cake. Harry read the story again. The boat that was searched had in fact been emptied earlier the same day. Hagrid had emptied vault 713, if you could call it emptying, taking out a grubby little package. Had that been what the thieves were looking for? As Harry and Ron walked back to the castle for dinner, their pockets weighed down with rock cakes they'd been so polite to refuse, Harry thought that none of the lesson he had so far had given him as much to think about the tea with Hagrid. Had Hagrid collected the package just in time? Where was it now? And did Hagrid know something about Snape that he didn't want to tell Harry?